The day after embarrassing a soldier, Mark saw her face on the news and couldn't believe his actions. The sun was setting over Phoenix International Airport as people rushed to board there. Flights, eager to get home. Among them was a woman in uniform, her boots firm, her posture straight, and her expression calm yet focused. She walked with the confidence gained from experience, but her eyes held a slight exhaustion, the kind that comes from long days away from home. Sergeant Emily Carter, a decorated U.S. Army medic, had just returned from a difficult deployment. Tonight, all she wanted was to sit down, close her eyes, and think about the joy of reuniting with her family after months apart. She walked onto the plane, her uniform catching a few glances. Some passengers nodded in respect, but others simply turned away. She didn't mind. She was used to being unnoticed. What Emily didn't expect was a man sitting just behind her. As soon as she passed by, he narrowed his eyes and curled his lips into a sneer. She could feel his judgment as she stowed her bag and took her seat. He was the type who wouldn't keep his thoughts to himself, and soon everyone on the plane would hear them in the most uncomfortable way. As the plane filled up, Emily reached into her jacket pocket for a small photo of her son and daughter smiling at a family picnic. It was her anchor, something that kept her grounded no matter how far she traveled. But before she could focus on it, a voice, loud and sharp, broke her quiet moment. "Figures," the man scoffed, making sure his voice could be heard across the cabin. "Of course, they let just anyone wear that uniform." Emily didn't react. She kept her eyes on the photo and took a deep breath. But the man wasn't finished. "I don't even get why they bother," he said. "What's she doing? Handing out bandages?" Bet she's never seen real action. But Emily had seen real action. She had saved lives and faced unimaginable horrors. For now, though, she chose silence. The murmurs of the cabin grew as passengers turned to listen. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. Emily sat still, her fingers tracing the edge of the photo. She had faced worse than words, much worse. But there was something about this moment, the raw disrespect, that settled uneasily in her chest. The man leaned back in his seat, clearly enjoying the attention. He was in his late 40s, wearing a polo shirt and khakis, his expression smug. "You know," he continued, addressing the cabin, "real soldiers, the ones who do the real work, don't need a parade just for showing up. It's all a show these days." Emily's jaw tightened, but she held her composure. The woman next to her, a young mother with a toddler on her lap, whispered, "Are you okay?" Emily nodded, offering a faint smile. She didn't need to explain herself to a stranger. Her action spoke louder than any words could. But the man wasn't done. "Bet she's never even left the base," he muttered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One older gentleman across the aisle leaned forward to speak up, but his wife tugged on his sleeve, shaking her head. "Don't," she whispered. "It'll just make it worse." Emily remained silent. She had been trained to assess situations, knowing when to act and when to hold back. This was one of those times. But she couldn't help but wonder, why did this man feel the need to tear her down without knowing anything about her? Was it the uniform, her skin, or just his own insecurities coming to the surface? A flight attendant, a small woman with a tired but friendly smile, walked down the aisle. She paused near Emily's row, glancing between the soldier and the man. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone firm yet professional. "Oh, everything's fine," the man said with a mocking grin. "Just making an observation. I hope I didn't offend anyone's sensitive feelings." The flight attendant's jaw clenched, but she nodded and moved on, clearly aware of the rising tension but unsure how to handle it. Emily let out a slow breath. She had dealt with men like this before, those who pushed boundaries just to see how much they could get away with. As the plane began to taxi, Emily closed her eyes and leaned back in her seat. The man's words continued to echo throughout the flight, each one dripping with disdain. Yet Emily remained, still, her silence louder than any words. She knew who she was, what she had done, and what she was capable of. The man's words might sting, but they could never define her. But something else lingered in the air, a subtle tension among the other passengers. The man's words were aimed at her, but they affected everyone around her. As the plane climbed higher, Emily's thoughts drifted far from the cabin, far from the man and his ignorance. She thought of the desert heat of Iraq, where each day tested her endurance and courage. She had been a combat medic for nearly a decade, her role not just to treat wounds but to make life and death decisions in split seconds. One day in particular stayed with her. She had been part of a convoy bringing medical supplies to a remote village. The route was dangerous, filled with remnants of past conflicts. Then an IED exploded near her vehicle, deafening everyone in the convoy. In the chaos that followed, Emily sprang into action, pulling soldiers from the wreckage as enemy fire rained down on them. She stayed calm, focused, even as her own safety was at risk. Emily didn't do it for recognition. She didn't care about awards or ceremonies. For her, it was about the people she served with, their faces, their lives. She remembered a young soldier she saved that day, a 19-year-old who had just ridden home to his mother the night before. His leg had been broken, his face pale from blood loss, but he survived because Emily refused to give up. And it wasn't just soldiers. Emily had spent hours helping civilians caught in the crossfire of a war they had no part in. She remembered a young girl, no older than 7, who had been injured by a mortar. Emily carried her to safety, singing softly to calm her until help arrived. That girl smiled despite the pain, was something Emily would never forget. These were the moments that defined her. Not the uniform, not the medals, but the lives she had touched. Yet she had also faced battles off the battlefield, times when her competence was questioned not because of her skills, but because of her gender and the color of her skin. She had endured comments from soldiers and superiors who doubted her abilities. But each time she proved them wrong. Her actions spoke louder than their prejudices ever could. Back on the plane, Emily opened her eyes, the memory still vivid. She glanced at the man behind her, now flipping through a magazine, unaware of the weight of his earlier remarks. She didn't hate him. Emily had learned that hatred was a burden. Instead, she felt a quiet resolve. He didn't know her story, and he probably never would, but his ignorance would never overshadow the truth of who she was. The report continued, highlighting Emily's courageous service. They mentioned the ambush on the convoy, where she risked her life, dodging gunfire to save the wounded despite being injured herself. A villager recalled, "She saved my son. Without her, we would have lost everything." Jake's stomach twisted. He put his coffee down, his hands trembling. The anchor spoke of Emily's Bronze Star and bravery, stating, "This is the heroism that often goes unnoticed." Jake couldn't look away. The woman he had mocked was a true hero. His harsh words echoed in his mind, and he remembered the calm in her eyes as she silently endured his insults. She didn't need to respond. Her actions spoke louder than anything he could say. Jake slumped in his chair, consumed with shame. He had thought he understood the world, but now he realized how wrong he had been. Guilt weighed on him as he replayed the events from the flight, the pride in his mocking voice, the dignity with which she endured. It all felt like a cruel joke. Now, he realized Emily had not only survived unimaginable situations, but had done so with honor. Jake spent hours reading about Emily online, learning about her missions, the lives she saved, and her sacrifices. His actions had not been a mistake. They reflected deeper biases he had held. Emily's story shattered his narrow view, forcing him to confront the truth about himself. Jake couldn't undo his harm. His words were already out there, witnessed by many, but he felt compelled to act. He donated to a veterans charity and wrote Emily a heartfelt apology, acknowledging his disrespect and vowing to change. His letter concluded, "You didn't deserve my hate. You deserve my respect, and I failed. I'll carry that failure, but I promise to do better." He wasn't sure if Emily would ever see his letter, but writing it was his way of holding himself accountable. He knew change required more than guilt. It needed action. A week later, Jake sat thinking about Emily. He realized her story had taught him something crucial. Everyone has a story, often with burdens we can't see. The least we can do is show respect, especially when we don't understand. Jake knew he wasn't a hero, but he hoped to live with the courage Emily had shown, not to face battles, but to confront his own flaws and strive to improve. Sometimes, heroes like Emily seem distant, but they walk among us. So, the next time you're about to judge someone, pause and think about their story. If the story resonated, take a moment to reflect on how you treat others. Lead with kindness, understanding, and respect. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that challenge the way we see the world.